Max had crossed deserts, highways, and towns that never knew his name. His paws bled, but his heart never wavered. The scar near his ear was a reminder of the battles he had survived, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. He stood before a quiet door, his chest tight, the scent of home rushing back after endless miles. Inside, Sarah sat alone in grief, her life dimmed since she had lost the only one she loved. The first scratch at the door made her stiffen. The second made her breath catch. And when the third came, she whispered a name she thought she would never say again. Then the scratching stopped.
Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update.
The highways stretched endlessly, silver ribbons cutting through deserts, forests, and towns where no one knew his name. Max walked them all, one paw after another, leaving faint pawprints across dust, snow, and rain-soaked ground. His black and tan coat had grown ragged, the scar near his left ear gleaming when the sun broke through clouds. He was tired, hungry, but his eyes never lost the glow of determination. He had a purpose. He had a home to find. Nights were the hardest. In the silence, every sound pressed heavier on him, the whistle of trains, the bark of distant strays, the hum of trucks. He pushed through storms, pressing his body against fences for shelter, curling beneath branches that rattled with wind. When hunger gnawed at him, he pressed forward still, remembering the scent of love. He was searching for what others could not see, a single door, waiting at the end of miles. The deserts tested his strength. Heat shimmered off cracked ground, the air shimmering like fire. Max's paws blistered, each step dragging as though weighted with stone. He stopped only long enough to dip his muzzle into shallow pools of muddy water. Even then, his gaze lifted beyond the horizon. He did not wander, he traveled. Each stride carried him closer to memory stitched deep inside, the echo of a voice, the comfort of a hand, the promise of belonging. Forests wrapped him in shadows next. Branches reached low, tugging at his fur, scattering pine needles across his back. Nights they were colder, stars hidden by thick canopies, but the wind carried sense of life. Rabbits darted unseen, owls watched silently from above. Max pressed on, paws damp with moss and earth, eyes scanning ahead. He was guided by something stronger than instinct, an invisible line that pulled him onward, a bond unbroken by distance. Rain fell hard across highways, pelting his back until his coat dripped heavy and dark. Cars streaked past in blurs of light and noise, their drivers blind to the figure pressing against the shoulder. His claws clicked against asphalt, slipping sometimes, but he never stopped. Raindrops glistened on his scar, each flash of lightning illuminating the mark like a beacon. To some it was just a wound. To Max it was proof of survival, proof that nothing could stop him. Season after season shifted above him. He walked through summer's heat, autumn's winds, winter's snow, and the blossoms of spring. Each left its mark. In summer, his tongue lolled, dry and desperate. In winter, his paws bled against frozen ice. Yet through every trial, the same determination pushed him forward. His pawprints stretched across America like an unspoken map, each one closer to where he belonged, each one closer to the sound of a voice that had once called his name. There were strangers along the way. Some tossed him scraps of food, their kindness fleeting but enough to keep him alive. Others chased him away with shouts, waving hands, slamming doors. Still, Max pressed on. He did not need their shelter, did not seek their approval. His journey was not for them. His loyalty was fixed on something they could not understand, a single face, a single memory waiting at the end of the road. He walked for that alone. The nights grew colder as autumn returned, painting trees in fire and gold. Leaves drifted across quiet streets, crunching under his paws as he slowed. His body trembled with exhaustion, but his eyes lifted, scanning every house he passed. Each door loomed with possibility, each window glowed with light, but he did not stop until one street, one house made his chest tighten. The scent was faint, carried in the wind, but unmistakable. Home was close. The journey was ending. Max's paws dragged across cracked pavement, scattering brittle leaves in his wake. He stopped before a house wrapped in silence, porch light glowing weakly against the autumn dusk. The air smelled of familiar warmth, of memories pressed deep into his heart. He lifted his head, scar catching the light, eyes fixed on the wooden door. For a moment he stood still, trembling from miles of travel. Then he stepped forward, pressing one paw against the wood. Scratch. The sound echoed down the quiet street, sharp against the silence. He scratched again, claws dragging across the door, leaving faint lines like pawprints carved into memory. Inside, the house stirred, lights shifting, air tightening with anticipation. Max lowered his head, pressed closer, his body shaking with both fear and hope. He had found it. After endless miles, after deserts and storms, he had found the door. He scratched once more, harder this time. The sound carried into the night. Then the scratching stopped. Max stood pressed to the wood, breath fogging the autumn air as the porch light hummed. His paws ached, yet his resolve felt steady like a held note. He lifted one paw and set his claws against grain marked by years of weather and patience. He scratched again. The sound rose and carried along the quiet street like a small alarm. Leaves skittered and tapped the steps, while the wind threaded through the railing. His scar near the ear burned with the cold as he leaned closer and listened for the life inside. He scratched harder. Inside the house, the quiet felt heavy and human. A lamp threw a warm circle across a rug worn by footsteps that had not returned. The air held dust, and the distant sweetness of tea left unfinished in a cup by the sink. A clock ticked like a heartbeat on the wall. Sarah sat where she always sat when night came early. The chair faced the window, though she rarely looked outside anymore. Her fingers traced the seam of a blanket folded over her knees like a ritual learned during long months of grief. Then she heard it. One scratch climbed across the wood like a whisper that refused to be ignored. She held her breath and listened as the wind shivered against glass. A second scratch steadied into a rhythm that did not belong to branches or rain. Her heart rose like a startled bird. Max adjusted his stance and tested the panel for a softer spot. The door smelled of varnish and something else he knew yet could not name through thought. It was a scent carried over roads and seasons that guided his paws more firmly than sight. He set his weight and raked again. The marks left bright dust along the step like pale pawprints. The sound echoed through hallway corners and found the room where Sarah waited without admitting she was waiting. Each dragging line wrote a message that memory could almost translate. She closed her eyes and counted her breaths. Her house felt unchanged and yet different with each scratch. A photograph on the mantel caught the lamp glow and held it like a small moon. The chair beside hers remained empty, yet not silent, as if threads remembered a shape that once filled them. The clock forgot a second. Max listened for footsteps and found none, only the low hum of wires and the soft rush of air vents. He shifted and pressed his nose to the gap and drew in the scent again. It was quieter than water and clearer than rain, and it steadied him like a hand at his chest. He lifted his paw and answered the silence. The night held stillness around the house, yet tension ran beneath like a hidden creek. A car passed at the far end of the street and took its engine away. A porch moth drifted in slow circles through the light like a tiny planet that had lost its sun. The wind changed. Sarah opened her eyes and set the blanket aside with careful hands. She did not stand yet, not while the memory of false alarms still lived inside her body. There had been nights when pipes sighed or branches tapped, and she had hoped and then learned again how to stop hoping. The scratches continued anyway. Max remembered the cold of winter roads and the bitter taste of salt and old snow. He remembered the shade of trucks that roared by and the safer edges of fences where he waited for the storm to thin. He remembered the water bowls that were not for him and the faces that looked past. He remembered one face that did not. The scar near his ear prickled as he pressed closer. The porch boards beneath him gave a little and told him this place had been stood upon many times. The smell of the wood rose like a familiar song, and he raised his paw with a steadier rhythm than before. The message grew louder. Scratch and pause and listen and scratch again. He set a pattern that matched his breath and the beat he knew from those older days. The lines he left in the wood matched the faint lines of older years where weather had traced its own memory. The pattern spoke without words. Sarah stood finally as if the sound had reached a place where thought could not block it. Her knees trembled and then held, and she placed the blanket on the chair as if leaving a promise. She moved through the soft cone of lamplight and into the hallway where shadows gathered like questions. She took another breath. Every step to the door felt longer than the house could contain. The floor creaked and answered her footfall like a voice that was both present and far away. She brushed the wall with her fingers as if touch might borrow strength from paint and plaster. The scratches grew clearer. Max lifted his head and listened to those inside footsteps that pressed through the wood like small thunder. His chest filled with air that tasted of warmth and tea and the faint salt of tears. He placed his paw against the door again and felt the thickness and the life behind it. He gathered himself and sent another message. Outside, the light carved him from the dark, and made his coat a map of journey and endurance. The wind gathered leaves and laid them at the step like small gathered witnesses. The street waited with the patient certainty of ordinary places doing sacred work. The house listened. Sarah reached the entry and touched the chain, and then the lock, and then the knob. Her fingers shook and steadied and shook again as breath moved quick and shallow. Grief rose and tried to speak through memory, yet the sound at the door spoke louder. She placed her palm flat against the panel. Max felt that pressure through the wood and stilled for a heartbeat that felt like a mile. He leaned his weight toward the warmth that pressed from the other side. His body trembled for the first time with something more than cold or hunger or strain. He set his paw lower and prepared to speak once more. She closed her eyes because light made everything too sharp to bear. In darkness, the sound could travel without hitting edges, and the memory could step forward without looking down. The air smelled of autumn and tea and the faintest trace of rain beginning. She turned the lock. A small metallic release broke the quiet like a thread pulled free. The hall grew taller around her, and the door grew heavier in her hands, though she did not let go. She drew in air like someone preparing to cross a distance that is measured by courage, not feet. The scratches paused. Max shifted and lowered his head so the motion would be clear when the space opened. He remembered a porch that smelled like this and a voice that carried warmth through wood and winter. He planted his back paws to steady the tremor that rose through muscle and bone. He listened for the next sound. She curled her fingers around the knob and felt the cool metal answer her heat. The hallway light made a pale band along the bottom edge where the weather strip had worn thin. A tiny draft lifted a strand of hair and placed it gently against her cheek like a touch. She began to turn the knob. Across the threshold of that moment, the house held its breath. Outside, the night gathered itself and waited with the patience of fields under snow. The lamp behind her hummed a little, as if it knew something soft and enormous stood ready to happen. Then the scratching stopped. The knob turned slowly, each inch carrying the weight of months and memories. The hinges gave a faint sigh, a creak that stretched through the hall like the breath of something waking. The air outside mixed with the warmth inside, and for a moment the house stood caught between silence and revelation. Then the door opened. Max lifted his head. The porch light spilled across him, washing his coat in gold and shadow. His black and tan fur caught the glow, his scarf flashing for the first time before her eyes. His chest rose and fell in steady rhythm, but inside, every beat carried the miles he had crossed, the storms he had survived, and the one truth that had pulled him forward. He stood still, waiting. Sarah clutched the knob tighter. Her eyes widened as the shape before her sharpened against the night. At first it seemed like a ghost built of fur and dust, standing in the threshold of memory. Her breath caught, sharp and painful, because she had seen this shape before. She had traced this outline in photographs and in the corners of her grief. Yet grief was cruel. It conjured shadows and made the heart see what it wanted. She blinked, and still he was there. Max took one step closer. The boards creaked under his paws, and the sound tugged at her chest. He lowered his head, the scar near his ear glinting, a mark she knew without needing thought. It was the scar he had carried since the day her husband had lifted him from the roadside, a frightened pup with eyes too old for his age. Sarah's lips parted, but no words came. The night around them hushed. Leaves stilled, wind caught its breath, and the lamp behind her hummed as if unwilling to interrupt. Sarah's eyes burned. She wanted to believe, but belief had been stolen from her too many times. She had lived through months of false alarms, strangers calling with wrong dogs, shelters showing faces that weren't his. Each one had torn her open again. This couldn't be him. It was impossible, yet the scar glowed, undeniable. Max stood steady. He did not whimper or bark. He did not push. He simply held her gaze with eyes that had memorized her from the first day. The silence speak. He let the mark on his ear do the talking. He had traveled too far for words. Sarah trembled. Her hand lifted without permission, reaching into the cold night air. Her fingers hovered, inches from his muzzle, hesitant to cross the line between memory and reality. Max did not move. He waited, the patience of miles written into his stillness. His paw shifted once against the porch, claws scraping softly, a sound like the scratch that had pulled her here. Her knees weakened. The scar pulled her into the past, into the roadside where her husband had found him, into the laughter that had once filled this porch, into the weight of absence that had silenced it. Her lips trembled, and a single name escaped, broken and fragile. Max. The sound carried through the night like a bell rung for the first time in years. Max's ears twitched. His chest expanded as though that word had given him air he had been holding back since the journey began. His eyes softened, and for the first time he moved. He stepped forward. Sarah staggered back, her breath quick and shallow. The house seemed to tilt, her grief colliding with the impossible before her. She wanted to collapse, to give in to the storm rising inside her, but she held herself upright. Tears gathered and spilled, streaking her cheeks in silence. She reached again, slower this time, her hand trembling as though it carried the weight of the world. Max raised his paw, pressing it once against the threshold. The sound of his claws against the wood struck the hall like thunder in a church. He pressed again, firmer, the sound insistent, urgent, undeniable. It was a language she could no longer ignore. Her tears blurred her sight, but through the haze she saw him clearly now. The scar, the coat. The eyes that had followed her through grief. She wanted to believe, and for the first time in so long she did. And then, with the porch light flickering, Max took another step forward, his shadow spilling into the house. Sarah stood trembling, her hands still hovering in the air as though touching him might break the fragile thread holding this moment together. The porch light hummed, casting shifting shadows across the boards, painting Max in strokes of gold and black. His chest rose in a steady rhythm, but his eyes spoke louder than breath. They told of distance, hunger, storms, and endless miles. They told of loyalty carried across America. They told of love that had not died. She stepped forward. Her knees wavered, but her heart pulled stronger than fear. Tears streamed unchecked down her cheeks, falling onto the worn wood of the threshold, joining the scratches Max had carved. Each tear shimmered like a small confession of every night she had prayed for him. Every night she had whispered into silence. Max lowered his head, his ears tilted back, not in fear but in recognition. He had waited for this. The scar near his ear caught the porch light again, glowing like a brand of survival. He leaned forward, nose brushing the air between them. Sarah gasped, a sound both sharp and tender, as though the years of grief had cracked open in a single second. Her fingers touched his fur. It was coarse, worn by storms and distance, yet it was his. The warmth beneath it pulsed steady, alive. The touch broke the dam. A sob tore from Sarah's chest, raw and unrestrained. She fell to her knees, arms wrapping around his neck, clinging as if the world might take him away again. Her tears soaked into his coat. Her shoulders shook with the weight of relief and sorrow mixing into something too heavy to name. Max pressed against her. His paw lifted and rested on her arm, claws gentle against her sleeve. His body leaned into her collapse, steady and strong. He did not flinch. He had crossed deserts and snowstorms, highways and hunger for this moment to be here, pressed against the woman who had never left his memory. The night around them faded into silence. The street held its breath. The lamp in the hallway behind her glowed softly, casting a halo around the doorway. It was as if the entire house recognized him, as if the walls whispered welcome back. Sarah whispered his name again, broken but filled with new light. Max. Max answered without sound, pressing his paw tighter, pushing his muzzle deeper against her shoulder. His eyes closed briefly, his breathing slower now, calm, safe. He had found what he had crossed a nation to reach. He had found her. Her grief cracked further. She thought of her husband, of the day he had carried this pup home, of the laughter that filled their evenings, of the bond that had once made this house feel whole. Losing her husband had torn half her heart. Losing Max had stolen the rest. Yet here he was, standing at the door like a miracle. The sound of her sobs carried down the street. A neighbor's curtain twitched, eyes peering through the glass, confused by the sight of Sarah collapsed on her porch, clutching a dog that looked born of shadows and distance. The neighbor hesitated, then let the curtain fall. This was not their moment to disturb. Sarah pressed her forehead to Max's scar, her tears wetting the mark. Her breath caught and slowed, syncing with his. She whispered promises, half-formed, broken by sobs, but real. Promises of never letting him go again, of giving him warmth, food, home, and love until the end of his days. Max shifted, paw sliding lower until it pressed against her hand. His nails scratched lightly against her skin, leaving faint lines like signatures. He had signed his return, not in ink, but in touch. At last, Sarah pulled back, her face streaked with tears, her breath uneven. She looked into his eyes, amber, deep, carrying both suffering and light. "You came back," she whispered, almost accusing, as though the impossible had no right to be real. Max blinked slowly, patient, certain. He didn't need to answer. He had walked every mile to prove it. Sarah rose shakily, one hand still clutching his fur as if afraid the world might dissolve him again. She stepped backward, guiding him across the threshold. His paws pressed into the welcome mat, claws catching faintly against its weave. He followed willingly, body leaning toward warmth, toward the scent of home that had never left his memory. Inside, the air changed. Max paused in the doorway, scanning the familiar space. The rug, the chair. The quiet hum of the lamp. He lowered his head and sniffed, nose pressing against the floorboards as if searching for footprints that had long faded. His tail flicked once, slow, uncertain, then steadier. Sarah shut the door gently behind them, her hand trembling on the knob. The scratches on the outside wood gleamed faintly under the porch light, a reminder of the coal that had brought her here. But inside, silence gave way to something else. It was still quiet, yes, but no longer empty. The air felt alive again. Sarah stumbled back toward the chair and sank down, exhausted. Max pressed close, laying his head on her lap, his body trembling slightly as if the long road was finally catching up to him. She stroked his fur, her hands running over tangles and scars, over the ridge of his spine, over the place near his ear that she had kissed once when he was small. Her tears fell onto him, but they no longer carried despair. They carried release. The house adjusted around them. Shadows shifted as though making room. The clock ticked, not like a wound but like a heartbeat steadying itself again. The photograph on the mantel gleamed in lamplight, her husband's smile watching over them. Sarah's lips trembled, but her sobs softened into whispers of gratitude. She collapsed fully then, bending over Max, clutching him as though he were the only anchor in a storm. He remained steady, eyes closing, breath warm against her arm. The night outside pressed against the windows, but it could not enter, not anymore. And still, beyond the door, the scratches remained, etched into the wood, reminders of the miles, the hunger, the storms. They were proof of the struggle, proof of the bond, proof that love could cross any distance. Sarah's tears slowed, her body shook less. Her breathing matched his, yet as she pulled him fully inside, closing the door against the night, the wind rose outside, rattling the windows, shaking the branches against the house. It was as if the world whispered his journey was not fully over yet. The house was no longer silent. It breathed again. The air carried warmth, carried presence, carried life where absence had lived for too long. Sarah sat with Max pressed against her, his body curled at her feet, his head resting heavy on her lap. Her hand traced through his fur, tangling in knots and smoothing across scars, each pass reminding her that this was real. He was here. He was alive. He was home. On the door behind them, faint scratches still marked the wood. In the glow of the porch light leaking through the window, they gleamed like symbols carved by fate. They were more than scratches now, they were proof. Proof of loyalty, proof of survival, proof of a bond that distance could not break. Sarah's eyes flicked toward them and her breath caught. She thought of the miles he must have crossed, the storms he must have braved, the hunger he must have endured. She thought of every night she had sat alone, wondering, doubting, hurting. And now those scratches spoke the answer. He had never stopped searching. Max shifted, sighing deeply, a sound that seemed to empty years of weight from his chest. His paws twitched as though memory still drove him forward across endless roads. Sarah placed her hand gently on one paw, feeling the roughness, the calluses worn into pads by journey and struggle. Her tears returned, softer this time, carrying not despair but release. She thought of her husband, of the day he had carried this dog into their lives. She thought of laughter on this porch, of evenings when Max had laid between them, his tail thumping in rhythm with joy. That life had been broken. Her husband gone, her dog vanished, her heart emptied. She had thought it would never heal, yet here he was, pressing warmth back into the cracks. Max lifted his head slowly and pressed his muzzle against her hand. His eyes, amber and deep, held no regret, no sorrow. They held only certainty. He had found her. He had walked through hunger and storms and fear, but he had found her. He nudged her hand again, pressing it higher, as if reminding her that love was not gone. Sarah bent forward, her forehead resting against his scar. Her tears wet the mark, and she whispered softly, promises of safety, promises of love, promises of never letting him be lost again. She whispered as though speaking to her husband too, telling him she would carry both their love for this dog until her last day. Max closed his eyes, his body settling into stillness. His breaths grew deeper, steadier, calmer. His tail shifted once, brushing softly against the rug, a gesture of peace. For the first time since his journey began, he allowed himself to rest. He was home, and home meant safety. The night outside pressed against the windows, but inside the house, light held stronger. The scratches on the door remained, a reminder etched into wood, but the air within was warm. The clock ticked steady, the lamp glowed, and Sarah's sobs softened into whispers of gratitude. She rose slowly, guiding Max toward the fireplace. He followed, his paws dragging slightly, his body weary but obedient. She settled him onto a soft blanket, laying it out as if she were laying out an altar for something sacred. He curled into it, his body folding with relief. She knelt beside him, stroking his fur until her hand grew tired, yet she never stopped. Memories flowed through her of empty nights, of prayers unanswered, of doors that had opened only to disappointment. Each one dissolved now into the reality before her. Max had returned. The world had given her back what she thought was gone. Her heart, fractured for so long, began to piece itself together. Outside, the wind softened. Leaves gathered quietly against the porch, no longer scattering in frantic circles. The street fell into a stillness that felt reverent, as though it too acknowledged the miracle inside the house. The scratches on the door glowed faintly under the porch light, no longer cries of desperation, but signatures of triumph. Sarah's eyes returned to Max. He shifted in sleep, his paw twitching, claws pressing faint lines into the blanket. She reached forward and gently placed her hand over it, feeling the rhythm of his pulse through the scarred pads. She smiled through her tears, whispering, "You're safe now." Hours passed. The night deepened. Sarah remained by his side, drifting in and out of her own sleep, her hand never leaving him. When dawn came, the light fell through the windows in soft gold, painting the scratches on the door in brighter strokes. Sarah stood slowly, her joints stiff, and walked toward it. She traced one line with her fingertip. Her tears returned, but this time they were steady, strong, cleansing. These scratches would never be erased. They would remain as a reminder that love had crossed a continent to return to her. She turned back to Max, who had lifted his head at the morning light. His eyes met hers, filled with calm and trust. His tail wagged once, slow but certain. She smiled through her tears, a sound of laughter breaking past her lips for the first time in years. Max stretched, rising to his paws. He stepped toward her, pressing against her legs, leaning his weight into her as though to remind her that he was real. She bent, wrapping her arms around him once more, her cheek pressed against his scar. The morning light washed over them, soft and forgiving. From desperation to joy, the journey had ended here. Not on highways or in shelters, not in storms or silence, but here at the door where love had waited and love had returned. Max was home.
Dogs truly are the most loyal companions in our lives. What did you think of this heartwarming story? Let us know in the comments. Like the video and share it with your friends. Subscribe to our channel for daily emotional dog stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Click here to watch the next story of love, loyalty, and the incredible bond we share with our pawsome friends.